We're happy that you're with us as we begin this study of Joseph, a life of many colors. The fact that he wore a robe that had so many different colors makes us think of the different aspects and elements of his life and how relevant they are to us today. Basically, everything that has to do with human experience and existence, we're going to see in his life. We have a number of people joining us online from Georgia and Boston and Nashville and Alabama and Wyoming or Montana, people we've known through Yellowstone Bible Camp and congregations we've worked with, and those that you know are signed on. And if you have registered for the class, you should have received an email from me today with the notes for tonight. If you've not signed on, just drop me an email and you'll have everything that will be on the screen in advance so that you can prepare and bring your thoughts and comments and questions, all right? So as we think about Joseph, we want to talk about the idea of greatness and what makes a character great. Is there something you notice about his life that stands out for you? Leadership. Wherever you put Joseph, he rises to the top. Even when you try to knock him down to the bottom, he's an influencer. He's a mover. He's a voice. He's a man of action. Good. Someone else? Yes.
No matter what happened to him, he leaned on his faith to God and he didn't cry.
He didn't whine and cry. He kept his faith. Nancy said no matter what his situation, put him in the pit, put him in prison, knock him down, he is still who he is. You know, he lived to the age of 110, and 80 of those years he was in Egypt. But he never stopped being who he was. And his direction, his purpose, his aim, his faith, no matter what. And the dreams he had as a young man stayed with him until finally God brought them all to pass. What stands out of Joseph? Yes?
A man of grace.
A man of grace.
Towards his brothers.
Toward his brothers. We're going to suggest as we get to that part of Joseph's life that he brought his brothers through that rough and trying and difficult ordeal, not to get even with them, but to help them come to a point of repentance and reconciliation so that he could then reunite with them and offer them mercy and grace and a home in that beautiful land of Goshen. And that's why when his brothers were with him, though he acted tough, he broke down in tears, you remember? And others could hear him crying because he was treating them with tough love, but it was because of his heart that wanted the best for them. Good. One else? Do you know that the record of Joseph occupies more space in Genesis than any other character? More than Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob? Maybe you think of Genesis 37, where the brothers, so jealous and enraged, sell him off as a slave. Or maybe you go back farther to Genesis 30, when he is born. But tonight, when we think about his roots, we're going to turn the clock way, way to the past to see the stock and the tree from which Joseph came. And the thing that makes him so amazing is that he did not follow in the bad steps of those that went before him. And the point we want to make tonight is he wasn't a victim, forced to be like those that lived before, repeating their errors and their mistakes and their unbelief and all the other characteristics we're going to see. What else made Joseph great? Anyone? Yes. Yes, Chuck said that he was his father's favorite. Was that a good thing? It's kind of like being the teacher's pet. It creates a lot of resentment and pushback. And when Joseph talks about his dreams, that he's going to be at the top and they will bow before him, He could simply be reporting what God has shown him, not necessarily arrogant or proud or look where I'm going to be and what's going to happen to you. But that favoritism we're going to see goes back to the generations before. And Jacob was one who followed in his father's playbook and his grandfather's by picking and choosing, I want this one more than the other one. What else? What makes Joseph great? He was tough. When you put him in charge of Egypt and he's negotiating, he's doing business with the people of that land and other places, he had to take a stand. He had to be bold and strong. What about his resisting temptation? Here he is away from home, and Potiphar's wife sees him. He's handsome. She's interested. She tries to entice him day after day after day. Finally, he runs away. He just said no. How could I sin against God? He said, your husband has entrusted everything in his house to me. I'm the manager of all of it, except for you. And it's not going to happen. Good. There's someone else? Oh, he was humble. Why do you say so? Going up the ladder, never became conceited, didn't let it go to his head, didn't become bossy or authoritarian, even when he could have done so. He saved his family. How about that? Is that a sign of greatness? They would have starved in that famine except for his provision. What about the fact that during the feast 7 years, he prepared for the famine of 7 years? He took the plenty and he thought, it's not always going to be here. We're going to need to set some aside for the future. He was patient. Why? Yes, the cupbearer and the baker. And Joseph was in prison for how long? 2 years. It was 2 years after the one man said, I'll remember you to Pharaoh. And then when Pharaoh had the dream, the butler, according to the Hebrew text, the butler said, I forgot, he said. Let me tell you about this man in prison. 2 years of waiting, but he never lost his dream or his faith. Good, there was someone else. Okay. Forgiving. He forgave every son. And that had happened to him at 17 when he was sold off by his brothers, right, Kay? What if he had let that fester and build like acid that would have eaten him alive? He could have killed them all. He could have done them in. And remember, they were so afraid that he would. And when their father died, they came to him and they said, our father said you shouldn't mistreat us after he died. Don't take this time to get even. Good. He did not return evil for evil. Suggests that what makes a great character is character, right? It's who you are when no one's looking. It's integrity. It's the sense of belonging and accomplishing and seeing life the way God would have you to see it. Stephen Covey said most people define greatness through wealth or popularity or position in the high corner office. But I call everyday greatness, it comes from character and contribution. Similar way, William Arthur Ward said, it's not possessions, power, position, or prestige. It's goodness, humility, service, and character. But someone else spoke up. Yes? He was just a good person all the way through. And we're going to see, in spite of what had happened in the years before. We can divide his life into 3 parts. From the time he's born until he's 17 years old, I'll say he was favored at home. Not much else we know. He was the first child of the wife that Jacob actually loved, Rachel. And so he was treated as special, far above and beyond his siblings that came before him. At age 17, he's betrayed, he's put in the pit, he's sold, and Then he's imprisoned in Egypt after he's falsely accused. And then when he's age 30, up until the time he passed away, he was exalted over Egypt. And in those 3 segments, we're going to see a number of significant topics. Tonight we'll talk about roots, the tree that brought Joseph into this world, and how different he was, again, from many things in his ancestors' lives. Then we'll talk about his birth into a situation where the family was totally dysfunctional and messed up, and did he possibly have a chance to do well? Then his dreams, his were given by God, ours are not. And yet, when we have a dream and we believe that God can use us, that there's a purpose for us being here, and we hold on to that, think of what the Lord can do. The betrayal by his brothers. In our own families, someone said in every family tree there's a little sap, right? We can relate to that. In-laws and outlaws, and on it goes. Stewardship, that wherever Joseph is, he's in charge. Whatever you put in his hand, he handles it. He takes care of it responsibly. You don't have to follow his every move. He's reliable. And then the injustice, the accusations and criticisms from Potiphar's wife. And then the reversal. We'll see how time and again, someone said that Joseph went from riches to rags to riches. The story of Joseph is just like this, isn't it? Push him down, God brings him up. Push him down, God brings him up. God does that with people. Jesus said that God exalts the humble and he humbles those who exalt themselves. And then planning. We'll talk about the feast or famine, right? The repentance that he helped his brothers to see. And the reconciliation. Oh, the tears and the joy when a family comes back together and things are made right. There's the hugs, there's the food, there's the fellowship. After all those years. Oh, that every family could have that today. And then Joseph's looking at all that's happened in light of God's providence. What did he say to the brothers? You meant it for evil, but God intended it for good. He did this to save lives. And I believe that in his pain, he found peace because of the providence of God. That life is so much not what happens to us, it is how we look at it. Someone said it's 90% attitude. And then the future. One of my favorite scenes in his life is the closing scene. When he tells his brothers, I remember the promise made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God is going to bring us out of this land of Egypt to Canaan. And he said, when it happens, take my bones with you. Joseph died in Egypt. He was put in a coffin, but he was never buried. And through all those years until the time of Moses, he was in that box. And the Bible says that when they crossed the Red Sea, they took the bones of Joseph with them. When they got to the land, they put his body in the place where he asked them that he might be buried. Hundreds of years after his death. And in between his death and the Exodus, they had that coffin as a reminder. There's a God in heaven. He said he's going to do it, and he will. Let's keep our faith. And then Christ-likeness, we'll look at parallels between Joseph and Jesus. And they're numerous. Rejection by his brothers is just one of them. Going from the bottom to the top, being rejected and then raised up again, so much more. But let's talk about roots. Have you researched your family history? Anybody? Have you checked on your DNA? Have you found any rascals in your past? One of you told me that you have someone in your tree from the 1800s that was known as the drunk judge. The person that told me that's quite sober. Nicole Lincoln told me, now brace yourself, this can be high risk. Her maiden name is Glenn, and she might be related to Lee Glenn. But she said very, very distantly, she made that clear. Let me see what the Wallers told me. I knew the Wallers were an awesome couple, but this made it even more clear to me. There's a plaque at the Alamo dedicated to one of David Waller's ancestors. His name is Tapley Holland. And they said when Travis drew the line in the dirt, who's going to stay and fight? The first one to cross the line and stay to fight was Tapley Holland, one of David's ancestors. And then Rebecca, on her mother's side, is related to someone named Fletcher Christian, who led the mutiny on the Bounty. You never know what you might find. And then she told me on her father's side, a German and a German Jew married and came to this country, likely because their family didn't approve of their marriage. The New York ports were full. They had to travel south. They disembarked in Mexico, and then they came in through Texas. And then Nicole told me something else too I think is so good. The value of learning where you came from. Have you noticed how many genealogies and chronologies are in the Bible? In Kelly's Sunday morning class in the Kings and Chronicles, the first 9 chapters of First Chronicles, nothing but names, basically, to get us up to Saul and then to David. And she said, it's a blessing when someone is not surprised to learn that you're a Christian. I like that. Titus 2, 9 and 10 says that we are to adorn the doctrine, make beautiful the teaching about Jesus. To live in such a way that, yes, we tell people, I'm a follower of Jesus and I want you to be also. But when that comes as no surprise. Anything else you dare to tell us tonight? Do you recommend family research? Is it a good idea? My cousin that passed away about 3 years ago, she did a lot of the research in our ancestry. Her mother and my mother were sisters, and she learned some very intriguing things as well. Yes, Carolyn? Okay, your aunt claimed that anyone named McKinney, especially if they were rich and famous. Colin McKinney, Collin County. Robert McKinney at the Alamo. And could go on and on. Some may have been hung by their necks, yes. Yes, yeah. No were ever hung by their tails. Oh, I got you now. I got you. Well, my cousin found someone, Carolyn, in our history that deserted during a war, and he was arrested for treason. Terrible. Good news is he was exonerated. Bad news is that was after he'd been hanged. Yes, Chuck, go ahead.
Everybody knows Patsy Cline?
Patsy Cline, yes.
That's her first cousin.
Your first cousin. Wow. Something.
Yeah, Hensley.
Is that right?
Her maiden name was Hensley.
Mm-hmm.
That's Carolyn.
Do you know there was a woman that no longer a member here, she's deceased now, but she had known Lee Harvey Oswald in junior high and high school, and I think had the chance to date him, but she passed on it. Okay, there are so many examples where we see that the roots we come from influence the people that we turn out to be. In other words, children reflect, don't you? Your father or mother, perhaps your grandparents. Don't you see children and you can recognize other members of the family, sometimes this one or that? I tell people if my dad were to walk in tonight, you would know instantly that he was my dad. Just by the way I walk and the way he walks, and by maybe some of his silly humor too. You'd say, that's got to be Corey's father. When we counsel people, let's say they're getting married, we ask questions about your family of origin. What was it like growing up? Tell me about your dad, your mom, and your siblings, and your place in the family, because you bring that into this new relationship. You see patterns and you see cycles. How about entertainment, where the older person and then the son or daughter go into perhaps music or something else? What about politics, when a father and a son both become presidents of the United States? Or sports, when there's a junior whose dad was also playing that same game. In business, it happens again and again and again. And in religion, prominent people who have influenced their younger ones to carry on in whatever they believe, whether it's true or false. Do we say like father, like son? Chip off the old block? Apple doesn't fall far from the tree. As the twig is bent, that's the way the tree will grow. And so sometimes, you ever say to your spouse, you are just like your father? No? How about you're just like your mother? Is it a compliment? So, I tell young men, if you want to know what your wife might be like in so many years, look at her mother. You want to know what a boy's going to be down the road? Look at his dad. Because it's just a general principle. You train up a child a certain way, and typically speaking, that's the way the child will turn out to be. On the other hand, as we all know, there are many exceptions to this very same principle. It's a rule of thumb, but think with me of so many cases, even in the Bible, like Ezekiel, the prophet, preaching the Word of God, and noting that each person's responsible for his or her own decisions, right? That you may have a righteous father, but the son could choose to be violent. Well, the father is not blamed for the responsibility of the son, nor is the son credited, so to speak, for his father's relationship to God. Then that rebellious son may have a son next generation. And so one thing we want to say is we have faithful, conscientious, genuine Christians among us who have given heart and soul to show children the way of Jesus Christ. And they took a different turn. They didn't walk in that path. And sometimes people say, oh, train up a child and he won't depart from it. That is a maxim that is biblical and true, but there are many, many exceptions. One son may say, I want to be just like Dad. The other, whatever I do, I'm not going to be like Dad, right? Jesus told two stories about two sons, and you know both of them. A son said, give me my share of the estate. He goes off to the far country and squanders. That's the meaning of prodigal. The older brother, you never gave me a party, you know. Look at the difference in the two. They're the same father. The father represents God. You can't blame that man for the way that either son behaved, right? And then the father with the two sons, go and work in the vineyard. One said, I will, but he didn't. And one said, I won't, but he did. Is that the way it is in families? And so even though we're cut from that cloth and there's nature, there's also nurture and freedom of choice and will and decision making. So we tend to imitate our parents, even in ways we don't realize, but we don't have to be a victim. We can choose. We can't choose the tree that grew us, but we can choose the tree that we grow. Is that right? So if you don't like the tree that you see, plant a new one. Don't be restricted. Don't be downcast. Don't give up because there was something dysfunctional or messed up in your past or in your present. Today is the first day of the best of your life for your family, for every relationship that you have. Well, this gives us the basic family tree of Joseph. Of course, you have Adam. Look how different Cain and Abel were, of course. And then Noah, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then Terah, who had 2 sons, Haran and Abraham. And then Haran has Lot, Abraham's nephew, and Abraham takes Lot in after Lot's father dies. And Abraham has Ishmael and Isaac and Midian. Then you have, in fact, Abraham has more children, by the way, after Sarah dies, right? Interesting to pursue that. Lot, by his daughters, Moab and Ammon. I mean, look at all the brokenness in what went before Joseph. Think about Jacob and Esau and all the issues, and we're going to consider some of that as we go on. So let's think about Genesis, right? Chapter 6 through 9, you have the flood. And then after that, you read in chapter 10 what's called the Table of Nations. Here is the dispersion of their descendants after the flood had ended. Well, how did those people go in all different directions and develop various languages and dialects? Well, that was the Tower of Babel. And so chapter 11 gives the cause that instigated everybody splitting up and being divided against each other. They wanted to build this, I'm going to call it a ziggurat, show you a picture in a minute, some kind of a pagan worship tower, and try to make themselves God, and God intervened. So then we come, perhaps you'll open your Bible to Genesis 11. Here you see the line from Shem down to Abram. We could mention that from Shem, we get the word Semitic. And so when we say that there's anti-Semitism, it is opposition to the descendants of Shem, basically to Jews, as we know. We're hearing so much about that today. So the family's located in Ur of the Chaldeans. There's Terah and his 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran, we noted, with Lot, and then Haran, Lot's father, Abraham's brother, dies in Ur. Abram marries Sarai, which apparently means princess, even though it's changed later to Sarah with an H in English, and the meaning is the same, princess. Apparently, that's his half-sister. So you have some mixture going on here before the others even come on the scene. Then Terah, Abram, Sarai, and Lot, they leave Ur to go toward Canaan. But when Terah dies, Abram then follows God's call. This is chapter 12 in Genesis. Go forth to a land I'll show you. I'll make you a blessing. All these nations will come from you, and through you the entire world will be blessed, looking ultimately to the coming of Jesus Christ. So, one of the great archaeological discoveries throughout history is in the very city where Abram lived. And a ziggurat was something of a terraced kind of platform, and they would put a temple on the top of it dedicated to some god or goddess. And many people believe that what was built in Babel, Genesis 11, was something like this ziggurat. But this one is preserved and verifies, obviously, the antiquity of that city and the culture from which Abram came. There was thriving industry. There was widespread religion. There was a moon god. We might pronounce it Sin, S-I-N, and likely a temple there, and a lot of the festive occasions, the events, the get-togethers, the family, the weddings, everything would have revolved around this moon god. This shows you the route from Ur of the Chaldeans. You can see the Persian Gulf there. You can see the Euphrates River and the journey that they would have made up to Haran. And then after Terah died, Abram and Sarai and Lot continued on coming into the land of Canaan. So idolatry and polytheism. Even after all that had happened in history, after Noah had found favor with God, there's an exception for you. The world had been filled with violence and wickedness, and God started fresh and clean. And then you had Shem and Ham and Japheth. We're going to do fine now. And next thing you know, these descendants are going back to what had been before, back to their roots. Not their most recent history with Abram and Shem, but instead with those in their culture. So it's a shocking statement. In Joshua, much, much later, Moses had died. Now Joshua's, his successor, is about to die. And he gathers all the people and he says, you're going to need to choose whom you will serve, right? Your fathers beyond the river, Terah, the father of Abraham, father of Nahor, they served other gods. And so Abram, what's that? Yes, that's exactly right. All the Amorites, all the people around them. That's right. Abraham, to his credit, he said no. He was a monotheist, only Yahweh, no other God. But as you go on down the line, if you look at Genesis 31, Joseph has another grandfather named Laban, right? And his own mother, Rachel, you may recall that there's an issue with Laban's gods. And Rachel steals them. That's another family trait we're going to see. And hides them. And Laban says, who's got my gods? Who's got my gods? And she's sitting on them and makes an excuse, a feminine reason she gives. And then in Genesis 35, now it's Jacob and his whole family. Put away all your foreign gods that are among you. So I want us to see that Joseph comes from a situation that is saturated with multiple gods and objects of worship and everything contrary to Yahweh. So Abram, his name in Hebrew means exalted father. The AB is like Abba or Abba. God changes his name to Avraham, which means father of a multitude. There are good seeds that Abram plants. God calls, Genesis 12, go! He listens. God sends. He responds. I love Genesis 12:4. So Abram departed. What a man. You talk about character and decision. Someone that would stand apart from all that was around him. Genesis 15:6. I'm going to make your descendants like the stars of the sky and the sand of the seashore. Abram believed God, and it was credited to him for righteousness. Genesis 22. Take your son. Interesting, God called him your only son, even though he had another son, Ishmael, and offer Isaac. Let's go, son. How does that happen? God knows that if he has Abram's son, he has Abram. If Abram or you or I would give God what is most precious to us, he has everything that belongs to us. Are there any bad seeds in Abram's life? Obviously, because there's more to be said, right? Abram and Sarah have no children, but there's a servant that's been born in Abram's expanded household. His name is Eliezer. And so Abram says, God, how about this? Let's work this out through him. This will be fine. Let's use Eliezer. How easy it is for us to think we have a better way, that we can improve on God's directions, God's truth, that we're supposed to make things happen when God has said he will take care of it. Well, chapter 16. Who's the other woman? Hagar, the handmaiden from Egypt. Sarah says, Abram, you go and get with Hagar. Let's see if we can't have a son this way. Who's the son that's born to Hagar? Ishmael. What's going on in the world today as a result? Anything happening in Gaza? Iran? All over the Middle East? Do you realize if that one decision had not been made, how different the planet would be today? You think that one person doesn't make a difference, good or bad? That a decision, a step, a word, a relationship in your life today can't alter the course of history? Who laughed at the idea that Sarah would have a baby? Sarah. I love the passage in chapter 18 where Sarah argues with the angel. Angel says, you laughed. Did not. Did too. Did not. Did too. Anybody else laugh? Abram laughed. Did you know Abraham? Look at 17:17. Both parents laughed. Abraham was 100 years old. His wife was 90. You know what Romans 4 says about Abraham's body? It was as good as dead. It was as good as dead. Can you imagine being that age? How many of you are glad we were younger when we had children? How many of you said parenting is for the, How many times did Abraham tell a half-truth, a lie, and say she's my sister? At least twice. Look at 2013. He said, everywhere we go, this is the plan. Why did he do that? My wife's beautiful. Some pagan ruler is going to take her and kill me. So what does he say? She's available. We're not married. The next thing you know, and you find that this Abimelech is more honorable than Abram. Because in one of the cases, Abimelech says, if I'd had any idea she was your wife, and he tells all the men, leave her alone. She's taken. Wow. Not even from this line of this family. Everywhere we go. So these are bad seeds. So is any of that going to play out in what follows? What is Jacob's wife Rachel going to say when she can't have any children? Take my handmaid. Same playbook. You'll see Leah then, who's had the biological children, doing the same thing. We'll talk about keeping score, particularly next Wednesday night. But this lie, did anyone else lie and say, my wife is my sister? Isaac. Did you know that? Abram's own son, Isaac, did the very same thing with the same consequences. Why? Roots. The culture in which we grow up, the parents and grandparents and other relatives and people in our lives, someone said children are wet cement. Mold them and shape them and make them. If you don't, someone else will. And when you think about the fact that they're following you and listening to you, don't beat yourself up. If you're faithful in serving God and they go a different direction, and yet recognize the power and impact that Abram had on Isaac. Well, let's think about Isaac. What does his name mean? The name means laughter. That's no joke. Here's a little boy. What are you going to call him? Let's call him Laughter. Why do you call him Laughter? You say, well, son, we thought it couldn't happen, and then you were coming, and we just LOL. We just laughed out loud. So all his life, he's going to reflect his coming into this world. It's going to affect his character. who he is. He's identified. You think about the power of a name. God says, Abraham, father of multitude, so forth. So Isaac married only one woman, Rebekah. That seemed like an improvement. And yet, copied his father's lies, said she's my sister. He was the favorite son, preferred over Ishmael, I'm saying. So what did he do with his own sons? He picked Esau. Hey, Daddy picked me, I'm picking you. That's what we do in our family. So since he picks Esau, what happens with his wife? Well, Esau's taken, so she'll take Jacob. And so now we've got the two of them in conflict. The one promoting this child, the one promoting... Does that ever happen in families today? And who benefits from it? No one. So Abraham had a favorite, Isaac. Isaac and Rebekah had favorites, Esau and Jacob. Is Jacob going to have a favorite? Who will his favorite be? And the beat goes on. And the cycle and the pattern, unless someone breaks it and someone says, we're not going to do that. We're going to treat our children as precious blessings from God. Each one different, unique, strengths and weaknesses, some needing more attention at times than others. That's not favoritism. That's just providing what's best for each one at their ages and in their situations. Friction, competition, deception. Who started it? Abraham. Who carried it on? Remember the friction between Sarah and Hagar? We didn't talk much about that. And remember the two women couldn't coexist? Neither could the two sons. Remember Hagar mocking Sarah because she was the one that had Ishmael? By the way, what does the name Ishmael mean? Heard by God. Heard by God. From the word Shema, to hear, and then El, which is one of the names meaning God. So, how's Rebekah going to be sure that her guy gets ahead? Well, Isaac is dying. He can't see so well. He's called upon his firstborn. Who's the firstborn? Esau. To come and get the blessing. Bring me some of my game. Esau's a hunter. Rebekah says what? Yeah. And she pushes her favorite son to deceive her own husband. And so Jacob she cooks the food, and he puts on like an animal's hair on his arms and fools his father. Jacob fools his father. The son fools the father. Does that ever happen in the next generation? Anybody fool Jacob? All those sons led him to believe what? That Joseph had been torn by wild beasts, and they brought the coat of many colors, we call it, and there was blood on it. Cycle, pattern, roots. So Rebekah taught Jacob by what she said and what she did to cheat and swindle and deceive. And that man is going to be the father of our hero. And yet Joseph doesn't cheat. He doesn't swindle. He doesn't deceive. He doesn't lie. He doesn't fudge the truth. And so the point we're making is really twofold. Our roots influence who we are. And yet we can choose what to do with that influence. To break the cycle, plant a new tree, learn from the past, but not be enslaved to it. And so this hostility between the brothers, and Jacob has to run away because of what he's done. Esau says, I'll kill him, kill him. And now you have a separation. Any families we know where siblings don't get along because of something that one did to the other or was perceived to have done? So now we come to Jacob. Jacob means heel catcher. Why? He was grabbing his brother's heel, trying to get out into the world first. But Esau was born before Jacob. The name Yaakov in Hebrew also means usurper, supplanter, someone who would take what belongs to someone else. Who did he learn that from? Mother. And so I should say the name Israel, we'll talk about that, because he wrestled with a man and prevailed. And then God said, you've striven with God. Israel may mean striven with God or prince of God. Here's a man that took on a manifestation of God, a man representing God, and fought him. So Esau means hairy. How would you like that for a name? Huh? Or why was he renamed Red? Because the food he wanted. He traded the birthright for a bowl of that red stuff there. Hebrew word for red is Edom. You just remember Edom, you know? There's the food he had. For the rest of his life, there goes Red, there goes Big Red. Why do you call him Big Red? Well, he gave up what really mattered. You talk about let's make a deal or no deal. So Esau was also at fault. He said, I'm famished. I'm going to die if I don't get dinner soon. Have you ever had a teenager? What time is dinner? What are we having? I don't think I can make it. And so the Bible says in Hebrews 12 that Esau later, particularly after his brother stole the blessing, he cried and cried and cried. Now the Hebrew word Yaakov, that means to supplant or usurper, is actually used as a verb in Genesis 27:36. Esau tells his father, my brother's rightly named Jacob because he supplanted me. He Jacobed me is the Hebrew word twice. Okay, and so feared and fled. Jacob was cheated by his father-in-law, right? Laban. He changed his wages 10 times, Jacob said. So Jacob came from a family that cheated. Jacob gets into a family that cheats, and Jacob himself lives down to his name. Did he get cheated with the daughters? I've told you one of my favorite Hebrew words. My Hebrew is not extensive, but shakav. Shakav means to lie down with or have relations with. And the way we remember that word in school was that when Jacob thought he was getting Rachel and he woke up with Leah, he had the shock of his life. And so we're just seeing that this goes on and on and on. He marries, gets Leah on the swap, works 7 more years and gets Rachel. But later he speaks as if he has only one wife. Genesis 44:27, my wife, singular, bore me 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin, as if he doesn't have the others. Well, we'll have to stop there, but we'll talk about Joseph's birth coming into this dysfunctional setting and what sort of person he might become. You have some takeaways. I sent you the email. Once again, if you're not on my list, drop me an email and I'll send you these slides and have you on to receive each week. Thanks for being part of our study tonight.